Hello, Thrive Nation. I've got a very unique guest on the show, and it's by absolute persistence that I've got him on the show because he's a world international health hero. And I heard about him through Singularity Summit, where we were co-speakers. Jamie Metzl is absolutely a legend in the health sphere. I've listened to a lot. I've read his book, Hacking Darwin. He's a multiple novelist. He's a futurist in the healthcare space. He's a futurist in technology. He started an incredible social global movement called One Shared World. He's a geopolitical expert. He's an expert on genome editing. This man is someone I highly respect, and so I'm very grateful for his time. Welcome to the show, Jamie.
Thank you so much, Steve. I really appreciate your reaching out, and I'm thrilled to be here. And I have to say, your absolute persistence was what got me here. And in all of life, if we just keep pushing where we want to go, we'll eventually get there.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad you've honored my persistence because you've been on the Joe Rogan show and the experience, and I listened to that. So you are very well known. And so it's probably a bit harder for me to get you on the show than Joe.
Well, I've been on Joe's show twice, and after I was on the first time, people would reach out to me and say, wow, how did you get on Rogan? I have my publicist who has been working on it for months and haven't made it. I said, it's funny. I just went on the website. They had a little thing that said, contact us. I hit contact us. I had added a few sentences. They responded. Poor Joe is going to get a lot of messages from Africa now, but they responded the next day and said, we'd love to have you. It seemed pretty easy. And only later did I realize how unique that was.
Yeah,
but I was happy to be there, and I'm happy to be with you because what we're talking about here are just some pretty fundamental changes in our world.
Absolutely.
And everybody needs to be part of the conversation about where we go and how we get there. And so you have a unique platform in South Africa, but many different places. We need to be inclusive. And certainly just before the beginning of the pandemic, I was in South Africa, in Cape Town, for our meetings of the World Health Organization Expert Advisory Committee on Human Genome Editing. It was just before everything shut down. We had some incredible meetings with people from representatives of the Sun community, the kind of the purely indigenous humans, the kind of humans. So we all have to come together and in struggling with these big issues so we can make wise decisions about the best path forward.
Absolutely. And that's what I've loved about you, Jamie. You're very collaborative. You're very respectful of where people have come from, their views as well. And you want to really just unpack it in the most sort of correct way, without judgment, without, just really being too opinionated, to hear different sides and to include everybody from all walks of life. So that's incredible. And I do want to talk later, hopefully, if we get time, about pandemic origins. But let me give you a little bit of a frame in terms of where I want to go. I do want to talk about the global health crisis in terms of what's happening with health. You're a healthcare futurist, and looking at the lenses, possibly give us a stratosphere view through the lens of cardiovascular disease, through the lens of cancer, through the lens of neurodegenerative diseases, through the lens of respiratory diseases, because I think the stats are quite evident, and we can sort of debate the actual facts and figures, but 60% of Americans have one chronic disease. I think 40% have multiple chronic diseases. Here in South Africa, 80% of people over the age of 50 have hypertension, have high blood pressure. So we've got a world health crisis here, and that doesn't include the communicable diseases, but these are non-communicable diseases. And we've got I think, a huge pandemic on our hands if we have to talk about it in sort of that light. Tell us what's going to happen in health in the future, because I think it's really, really important for people to have hope. The show Made to Thrive is to give people, inspire people with hope. There's so much negativity, there's so much pain, there's so much suffering out there. But tell us what's going to happen in the future that's excited you recently.
Sure. So I'm going to talk about the future, and I'm going to talk about the present, because certainly in the future, there is a lot to be excited about in life and in the narrower field of healthcare. And I'll come back to it, but certainly we're transitioning from our world of generalized healthcare based on population averages, where everybody gets treated the same based on being humans, which is actually a huge improvement on the past, where everyone just got a bunch of stuff and some worked and some whole societies had terrible healthcare. An apology for background noise you
No
may hear.
problem.
We're getting new tiles. I'm at home
Okay.
and we're getting new tiles in the kitchen.
No problem.
And so we're transitioning to our world of precision or personalized healthcare, based on each person's individual biology. And so that's much better because if you get a treatment, it will be and increasingly is tailor-made for you. And that's why the whole new field, for example, of gene therapy is so exciting. And beyond that, because we're going to need a lot of information about who people are on a molecular level to do precision healthcare, we're going to build massive data sets, bringing together people's genotypic or genetic information and systems biology information and phenotypic information, which is just how those genes and that biology plays out over the course of their lives. And we'll be able to increasingly unlock some of the secrets of complex biology. And that'll move us from a world of precision healthcare to predictive healthcare, health and life. So rather than getting healthcare when you're sick, you'll get preventative care. And then life, connected to your theme of Made to Thrive, will be about optimizing potential benefits and minimizing potential harm. So all that is very exciting. But if you are excited, if your listeners are excited about this big future of this technology, you should be super excited about the opportunities that we have now, because whatever the promise of these technologies within our lifetime, in my view, they pale in comparison to the miraculous treatments that everybody can get right now for free. And that is diet, exercise, attitude. If we had a pill that had the equivalent, that was the equivalent over the course of your life of exercising an hour a day, that would be the most miraculous pill we could ever imagine. It is so far beyond anything that our science can even conceive of for the relative near term. So if anybody's excited about improved health in the future, what you need to do is apply those lessons now to exercise. And exercise doesn't mean I do ultra marathons and Ironmans. You don't have to do that. You have to do something every day. Go for a walk, do something. Our bodies are made to move. Sitting in a chair, as we're both doing now, it's fine once in a while. It's not fine if it's all you do. Everybody has to exercise every day. And people dread exercise, but the goal is to make it easy. Talk on the phone, talk while you're exercising. Go walk with friends. In South Africa, you have such beautiful nature, and which I've experienced there. Go hiking, find something that you love doing and just be physical. Same with diet. We all know.
Jamie, I'm going to stop you there because I think a lot of people know these things, but they're not applying it. If you look at the obesity epidemic in the US, if you look at the obesity epidemic here in South Africa, in many areas, people know often what to do. They've got the knowledge, but it's the execution. And it's not only the execution, because it's the sustainability of lifestyle changes. And, I've been a physician in my other life for 22, 23 years. And people, even when they get sick, even when they're suffering, even when they're in pain, whether it's 6 months later or a year later or 2 years later, they've often forgotten their lifestyle habits. They've gone back to their default settings and they don't sustain their transformation. So is it a lack of knowledge or is it a lack of execution? And as this future healthcare, specialist, how are you going to take people from knowledge to continuous execution?
Yeah, and it's not just the individual. This is a whole, we need a whole of society approach. So certainly on an individual level, habits start early. And so we need to be in not just educating people, but engaging people from early on, and just, physical education in schools and seeking to instill habits. Secondly, we need to train not just healthcare providers, but everybody to encourage these kinds of behaviors from everybody else. Third, we need to make it easy and not hard for people. I mean, we can build cities. There are cities that are based on movement. As a matter of fact, many of our cities are increasingly becoming that way as a result of COVID, that a lot of, for example, the roads are being shut down and transformed into places for people to walk or to cycle. We need to have incentives. Insurance providers, for example, can provide those incentives, and certainly they can be positive in saying that if you take a certain number of steps, you can save money or something like that. Or even there's some people who are talking about having some kind of costs, increased premiums or things like that. But we can't just pin everything on the individual, because people, they come with different backgrounds, different experiences. We need to make it as easy as possible for people. And there are just certain defaults that are set in different societies. And our default, certainly here in the United States, the default is towards really not moving. I mean, I grew up in the Midwest, in the center of the United States, and it's big open country. Everybody has a car. Everybody has space. There's really not that much that you can walk to. So everybody drives everywhere. So you could live your entire life hardly moving. I mean, you could take 500 steps a day, like just really, really nothing. So big core point is we need to weave this into everything. It's not just individual motivation. That's just one piece of it. And people make these changes within communities. And so we need to make it easier for people just to do things, to go for walks, to be outside. So exercise is one, and the same issues apply to diet. Diet is a critically important intervention. I mean, many people have said it. Food is medicine. I mean, it's a set of instructions. Food is information that we're providing to our bodies, and it's easy. I mean, there's a default reason why we all get fat when given the opportunity, because basically our entire evolutionary experience, we haven't worried about getting fat. We've worried about starving to death. And so when you had some kind of available food source, the goal was to eat as much of that as you possibly could, so you would have fat that would get you through the lean years. And then when we had domesticated animals, that's essentially what domesticated animals were in many cases for us. Like, we ate as much as we could, and then we would store calories in some other being that would eat as much as it could. And when we needed the food, we would just take it from that animal. So it's totally explainable why wealthier societies tend to get fat. So it's the same response. We need education and engagement for young people. We need to expose people to healthier habits. We need to make it easier rather than harder to do the right thing. Like in the United States here, we have massive subsidies for corn, which translates into the modified cornstarch. We have public food assistance programs that can be used to buy soft drinks and all these kinds of things. So it needs to be a push-pull. So that diet, exercise, attitude, mental health, community building. I mean, you're familiar, Steve, with the concept of blue zones, these places in the world where people live on average longer than other places. So because it's on average, it's different from these individuals who live to be whatever, 110, 115 in some cases. On average, especially in diverse populations, means that the community is doing something right. And when we look at those, what are those things? It's the things that we've mentioned. It's diet, it's exercise, it's reason for being, it's community, it's not drinking a lot of alcohol, not eating too much meat, all these things that I think most people know, but as you said, it's hard for people to do.
But now it seems like, and I've asked this question before because my parents live in Cyprus, and I've been to my father's village, and I've been to my mother's village, and it's this outlying place, and they go to the square for lunch. They know their neighbors, they live off the land. But if you're living in a big city and cities are growing bigger, there's urbanization that's happening. How do we marry this fact of, well, we need to do what they're doing in the blue zones. We need to know our neighbors. We need to have purpose. We need to have an ikigai, a reason for getting up. We understand that community is probably the most important pillar. Social integration, social ties as a predictor of longevity is probably the number one and number two. But how do we marry this within a AI tech futuristic city where actually we're fighting against big pharma, we're probably fighting against big food, we're fighting against big agriculture and using glyphosate? And I think South Africa is probably the second most used glyphosate country in the world. It's intoxicating every single water table and every single farm, I think, in South Africa and Africa. How do we respond to these big companies with huge deep pockets and come up and say, look, we want things to change?
So in any environment, kind of anywhere, if there are competing forces and one force has a strategy and a plan and disciplined implementation, and the other side has a generalized aspiration or intent, the side with the strategy always wins. And so if we want these things to change, we need to organize. We need to organize as community. First, we need to start with consciousness and awareness, but that needs to translate into something, and it needs to translate into a set of instructions, which normally I think would and should be delivered through not just political systems, but through all the systems in a society that can balance those other interests. And right now, we don't have that. And I think South Africa and the United States are somewhat similar in this way. We're kind of big, messy, oftentimes chaotic societies. We both just had kleptocratic rulers who caused a lot of chaos, who then fomented riots on their way out the door. I mean, we have a lot of similarities, but we also have a lot that we have similarities in the bad way, and we have similarities in the good way. Societies that have really had to fight for a set of principles, to fight for freedoms that are not fully realized and highly imperfect. And so we have to organize, just like in South Africa. It wasn't just people needed to wish an end to apartheid. They had to organize. They had to fight for it. And if we want to have these kinds of communities, we need to organize, and we need to fight for them. And we look around at the world, there are different places, even big messy democracies. Some do a better job and some do a worse job. So I wish I could say there's an easy magic answer. There's not, but it's conversations, community building, articulating specific goals, and then driving specific changes. And even things like urban planning. You can build cities that divide people, or you can build cities that bring people together.
It just doesn't seem that there's any force here in South Africa or in Africa. A lot of people are just living on the bread line or just above the bread line. It's refined starches, it's, refined breads, it's soft drinks and Coca-Cola, and it's obesity at another level. It seems like it's the very minority that are looking, at improving their health and eating off the land and eating organic. I don't know if we're at the bottom of a trough, or are we going to rise up together when sickness really gets to another level?
I don't think so, at least from our experience here in the United States. But at least here in the United States, and I believe also in South Africa, there are government subsidies that are making these issues worse. And so definitely we need to begin a process of changing these incentives. And the other thing is that we need to invest to make doing the right thing as cheap and easy as doing the wrong thing. I think because if you have an option and you fully, fully subsidized fast food versus non-subsidized healthier food, most people are going to take the easier, faster option. That doesn't mean that societally the cost isn't greater. It's just people have made consciously or unconsciously a set of decisions about what should be easy for people and what should be harder.
Okay, let's talk about gene therapy, gene editing, and then probably gene doping in light of and possibly less gene doping. But the big killers out there, the non-communicable killers, what do we have to look forward to when it comes to cardiovascular disease? And possibly you can define sort of gene therapy.
So gene therapy is basically, our body, how do our bodies work on a genetic level? So we have our genes, which are in our genome, which is inside of the nucleus of the cells. And genes instruct our cells to create proteins. And those are the building blocks of the body. And so there's a whole new class of treatments called gene therapies, and there's different ways of different types of gene therapies. There's gene therapies where we take cells out of the body and genetically alter them to do something or to not do something, and then put those cells back into a person's body so that they either do more of the thing that we want or block the thing that we don't want. And so that's been very exciting for treating things. Starting the first round of this is for things like blood disorders and blood cancers. Now it's slowly moving toward problems with the liver and the eye, and it's starting with areas where the delivery is easier. And then there's the in vivo gene therapies, which means rather than taking the cells out, which is the case actually with the eyes, to put these edited cells into put the instructions into the body to instruct your cells or our cells to do something different. So gene therapies are an incredibly promising new front in healthcare. It's still the very, very early days. There are many thousands of clinical trials happening around the world. Not every one of them succeeds, but lots of them are. And so I talked earlier about our transition from generalized to precision to predictive health. This precision health is what gene therapy gene therapies are. It's really exciting. And so there are many, many different applications. And that's what we're studying now, and what scientists around the world are studying through clinical trials, and also some early treatments. Sickle cell disease, for example, which I know is of high relevance in Africa. We've had the first successful gene therapies to treat sickle cell disease. That doesn't mean it's the only way to treat sickle cell disease. I'm an Ashkenazi Jew, for example. And Tay-Sachs has high prevalence in Ashkenazi Jews, and it's been dramatically reduced through testing and having testing guide reproductive decisions. So all very, very promising, and we could even go disease by disease or body system by body system. And in each one of them, there will be promising stories of gene therapies. But in general, the organs that are most easily reachable will be the ones where there'll be the most progress in the early days, because getting to the harder to reach areas in the body is just a harder trick.
Okay, let's talk let's get your sort of expert opinion on what's going to happen with heart disease, cardiovascular disease, the strokes, cerebrovascular events. What are we looking at? Because it's still the number one killer, I think, worldwide. What do we have to look forward to, and what's going to be promising?
Yeah. So again, first point is always the first point. If you're worried about heart health, diet and exercise is the most important thing to do. But having said that, even if we all have great diet and great exercise, and even if you're maybe one of the world's fastest marathon runners, it seems our body is made up of so many different parts. They all need to work well. One thing, you may have a part of your body you've never even heard of, and it goes wrong and you're screwed. So whatever you do, I don't want to give the impression that just diet and exercise is the answer to everything. But it certainly is among the most important things that everybody can do now. So with heart, for example, there's a lot of really exciting research of using heart stem cells to increase the repair of our heart cells. I mean, that's one of the things that happens in just being human. Our bodies are always breaking down and then repairing. When we're younger, our mechanisms of repair just work better than when we're older. And then we have our stem cells that are most types of cells, not all types of cells, are constantly rejuvenating. But we're not like lizards where something gets cut off and immediately it gets fixed. So there are different stem cell treatments that are quite promising. Some including really just opening up the body and layering basically a cloth embedded with stem cells onto people's hearts. There are lots of things that are very, very promising for addressing the implications and the consequences of the heart attacks and strokes and whatever. And we're going to get all of those things because we're massively extending human health span and lifespan as a result of the kind of the blocking and tackling interventions of public health and diet and addressing infectious disease and all these other things that are allowing us to live longer. And so more and more of us are getting these diseases like heart disease, cancer, dementia that correlate with aging.
Great. And I've always been concerned living in Africa that the haves and the have-nots, that's going to increase in sort of space and time. And it reminds me of Justin Timberlake. I don't know if you saw the movie In Time, where time was the currency, but it's about 10 years ago, and the very wealthy lived in a certain part of the States, and they had, 1,000 years, and then, the workers and the middle class and the lower class had a day, had 2 days. Sometimes they had, an hour, they had a clock in at the end, a cup of coffee was 5 minutes, a, bus ride was 2 minutes, and the currency was time. A fascinating movie, but there were huge political and social sort of upheaval with regards to who had the finances and the resources and who had the technology. Now, is that going to happen in the future with regards to things like stem cells, with things like CRISPR technology and gene editing, where, the wealthy and those that have the resources are going to have incredible new, children with high IQs and incredible athletic performance and brilliant brains as entrepreneurs, and then the lower class aren't going to be able to afford the gene editing, and you get this perpetual cycle where they stay, at low socioeconomic sort of classes. What do you think about that dilemma that possibly could happen in the future with AI and tech?
Well, there's no doubt that what you've described is a possible future that we need to avoid. But if we want to avoid that in the future, the best way to do it is to recognize that we live in that world now. The difference of the life expectations of you, Steve, or me, or I'm sure most of your listeners, and the average person in the Central African Republic engaged in the middle of this, engulfed in this civil war with food scarcity, it's just massive. There's no future that we can imagine where the difference between us now and these future super advantaged people is greater than the future today between us and a person in the middle of the civil war in the Central African Republic. So certainly we need to do everything possible to avoid that kind of dystopian future that you've just described. But the first step is to recognize that we live in that world today. And if all 90% of the energy that we should put into fighting for that future that we want tomorrow should go into fighting for that future today. Having said that, if we don't identify the danger and how to address it now, we may blindly stumble into that world. And that's why for me, in Hacking Darwin, in my work with the World Health Organization, what I'm always promoting for, one, is an inclusive, what I call a species-wide dialogue on these technologies. That it's not just about education; it's about education, empowerment, and inclusive engagement of everyone. We need to be mindful of trade-offs, and we need to look at models. Some societies are doing this better than others. I mean, some societies like Israel is a good example, has much greater health equity than many other places. So what are the things that we can learn from those societies? In the United States, our healthcare system is massively unequal, and if we don't want that in the future, we need to address it now.
Great. And tell us, I've got a personal story. My son's 17 years old. We didn't have a problem conceiving with him. And then it came along to the second. It took us 12 years to fall pregnant with our second child, but through in vitro fertilization and the incredible technology. And I'm so grateful. And just talking to you now, I'm very emotional. I've got goosebumps all over me. My daughter's 5 years old. What a miracle, what a blessing. So I'm the recipient of incredible technology. And how far are we from gene editing, choosing your children's color eyes, their athletic performance, their IQ, and never mind staying away from sex to have a child. And you'd rather have a child than the gene editing to mitigate against risk and to optimize health and performance. Are we close there with gene editing and CRISPR technology? And maybe you can just explain a little bit to the audience what it is, what CRISPR is, and how close we are to that stage.
Yeah, Steve. So as you know, I write about this in my book, Hacking Darwin. And so maybe some of your listeners know this, but the world's first 3 genome-edited CRISPR babies have already been born. They're little kids in China, which I think certainly was very shocking for many people when we all learned this in late 2018. For all we know, there are more. We just don't know. And so when I talk about the future of genetic engineering, I see it in stages. The first stage is expanding the technology that you mentioned, Steve, that you and your wife have used, which is in vitro fertilization. There's a process called pre-implantation genetic testing that's sometimes used alongside IVF, and in that. So the eggs are extracted from the mother, fertilized with the father's sperm. After about 5 days, a few cells are extracted from each, and then those cells are sequenced, and that's used to determine if there are any genetic abnormalities that would prevent inseminating the mother, implanting one of these embryos in the mother that may have some kind of deadly genetic disorder. So the first phase will be expanding the use, which is already happening, expanding the use of pre-implantation genetic testing, just to know more about which embryos are being implanted. As a matter of fact, I'm on the scientific advisory board for a company called Genomic Prediction that's doing exactly that. The second step could be to expand the number of human eggs using induced pluripotent stem cell technology, which basically means you take an adult cell like a skin cell, induce that into a stem cell, that into an egg precursor cell, and that egg precursor cell into an egg. And if you do that, rather than 10 or 15 eggs, as you would get from average in IVF extraction, you could have 1,000. And then you could fertilize all 1,000 and then extract a few cells from each using automated technology and sequence them. And then if you're choosing from 1 in 1,000, suddenly you have real choice about all the things that you've described. And as we know more about genetics, we'll be able to basically read that genome with greater precision, not perfect precision, but greater precision. And then on top of that, there are these new tools of genome editing. And you asked about CRISPR, which is just one tool for genome editing. As I mentioned before, the genome is the set of instructions inside the nucleus of the cell. And so it's just kind of like the overused metaphor is like word processing. But if you imagine the genome as this twisting ladder, of A's and C's and T's and G's. And then you can go in and you can make one at some point in the future, maybe more. You can do it now, but with greater accuracy, more changes. And it's not as if we're going to be able to build children from scratch. People are imagining that. Maybe that'll be possible 1,000 years from now, but certainly not now. But it's already possible because it's already been done, not all that well, but done, to edit the genome of a pre-implanted embryo to do something. And so the thing that you would do right now, because we're in early stage of this revolution, it would need to focus on single gene mutations. And our genes aren't all doing one thing. They're all doing, I'm sure, lots of things. We don't even know everything that they're doing. But when there is some kind of harmful mutation that we know will cause a deadly genetic disorder, and even that we don't always know because there could be some other mutation that counteracts it. But my guess is that the cost-benefit analysis over time, not yet, but over time, will justify going in and making just a single letter change and that could have the potential to change the fate of what could be a child who lives for 5 years and turn that same child into somebody who lives for 100 years or 90 years or whatever it may be. And then we're going to move along the complexity scale from simple to complex, from smaller interventions to more complicated interventions. And we'll do that because essentially the complexity of our biology has remained roughly constant for millions of years, but the sophistication of our tools and our technologies are increasing on an exponential curve. And so we will be able to make more and more significant and meaningful interventions over time.
Sounds great. Thank you for that summary. With regards to the umbilical cords and placental cells and all these stem cells, is it important that people store these? Is it a fad? I mean, it's been spoken of for so many years to keep these, and then you got to store them and have storage. Are they going to be useless for these stem cells?
Nobody knows. For sure, if people throw it out, there will be no use. And so my view is if you can afford it, I mean, don't break the bank, don't take from some account like your kid's education or food or whatever. But if you can afford it, in my view, storing certainly cord blood is controversial because they have public cord blood banks, which are probably what people would need if they ever needed cord blood, but you never know. But I'm a big believer I'm a quantified self person. I want to know things. I want to store things. It's potentially useful. Actually, in my novel Eternal Sonata, I talk about in the future people having some cellular rejuvenation from stored materials, and that's science fiction. But I'm a big believer. Know what you can, store what you can. Probably it won't be helpful, but if it is helpful, you'll be glad you did it. And again, this is bad advice, but it's just money. But so anyway, so that's my view.
Cool. Let's pull on the string of wearables, of sort of artificial intelligence, of chips being implanted. I wear the Oura ring. I know my sleep data. I'm talk about quantified self. I got my bloods. I've done my organic acids test. I've done the whole A to Z from functional medicine. I've been practicing for many years. What is your view on sort of the latest wearable tech? And obviously now Apple moving into measuring glucose through the new Apple Watch. And what is the way of the future? And should people be embracing this biohacking phenomena?
I love it. I think it has the potential to be helpful, but to be helpful, it needs to be far more seamless. It can't just be nerdy people like you, Steve, and me. It should just be seamless. Like what I would love, and I've been talking to people about this for years, I just want my entire bathroom to be a sensor. I want the toilet to be a sensor. I want the mirror to be a sensor. I want to have a breathalyzer. And I don't even want to think about it. I just want to go there and just in the course of living my life and brushing my teeth, data is being collected. That data is being communicated with my refrigerator. And every day I have an apple, strawberry, banana, whatever smoothie that tastes exactly the same. But it's not exactly the same because my body is being monitored. I'm being given nutrients that I need. If I need some kind of instruction, or my doctor needs some kind of instruction, I just wanted to show up. I just think that right now, the barrier to entry for all of this quantified self stuff is just too high. And that means that people like you and me, who are part of the singularity movement and all of that, we can do it. Sometimes there's some actionable information, but I'd like for it to be seamless. And if we make it seamless, I am absolutely certain it will more than pay for itself, because we need what we now call healthcare is really sick care. We wait for some symptom to show up, but that symptom could have been germinating for years or since conception. Better that we know what's coming and start taking action as soon as possible. So I'm a big believer in all that stuff, but it's just too hard for people. And let's just say somebody is just saying, well, I can't be bothered. I don't want to measure my glucose every day. I don't want to, send in my stool sample once a month or whatever. And you could totally understand. With that, just take it easy. Just do blue zone stuff. Eat healthy, exercise. Like that's the most of it. But I do think I'm a big believer in quantified self.
I just want to move on to longevity as we sort of come closer to the end of the show. But Aubrey de Grey talking about longevity, escape velocity, with the research, on and
are you allowed to mention Aubrey de Grey these days?
Am I?
He's been in some hot. I'm just kidding, but he's been in some kind of hot water of late. But certainly, sorry to interrupt your question, Steve. But Aubrey talks about immortality. I don't think immortality is coming to humans anytime soon, because the longer we live, the more we run into the law of averages of some kind of weird thing, some kind of killer kangaroo or something will get us. But more, we just have so many damn parts in the human. So to live forever, we would have to have some kind of master aging switch, which we do have in a way, because when we make babies, our babies start out as babies, not as at our age or the added age of us and our partners. But certainly, I believe there's a real opportunity to significantly invest in extending human health span, healthy lifespan. And if we do that, again, it pays for itself, because as we mentioned earlier, the diseases we're most worried about, heart disease, dementia, cancer, are correlated with aging. And so if we age healthier, we will push back the onset of those diseases. We'll save huge amounts of money. And if we're wise, we can then invest those savings into further expanding health span. And that's kind of a virtuous cycle. But also, when we talk about extending lifespan and health span, we need to differentiate that we mean both individually, and I'm all for everybody doing everything they can to live healthier longer, starting with diet and exercise. But we also mean on average, communal. And that means that we all have an obligation to do everything we can to ensure that everybody on Earth has access, not necessarily to future technology, but to 20th century technology, the simple stuff: clean water, basic sanitation, nutritious food, shelter, all those things that are essential for living healthy.
I think that's important, because from what I know, the CDC, even before COVID hit, the last 2-3 years, longevity in the US has gone down. So it's a fascinating, fact to know that, the industrialized countries and those that are living the modern life, I think lifespan has reduced, never mind health span. They're sicker, quicker, multiple chronic diseases. So it's a very important, point you make. And that's your collaborative sort of spirit, which I really respect. I want to just get a little bit personal here about, this nerd, Jamie Metzl's biohacking journey, how he wakes up in the morning, how many cups of coffee he has, what exercise he does, how much he moves. Tell us about how you start your day, Jamie.
Very, very, very important. So every single morning, without fail, I have hot chocolate, and it's not just regular hot chocolate. It takes about an hour to prepare. That doesn't mean I'm working on it for an hour, but once I get the main ingredients and then I put it on a low simmer. I posted the recipe on Twitter after my Joe Rogan interview, but then I let it simmer and stir, and it's more kind of like a dark chocolate molten pudding. I don't recommend for everybody do this. I'm sure it's not healthy. Although at the exponential medicine conference just before the beginning of the pandemic, I looked up from my phone and somebody had one of the speakers. Actually, it was William Lee had a slide that showed that older people who had hot chocolate every day had lower experience of depression. So it could be a health intervention. So I do that every day. I exercise for 1 hour every day without fail. I never, pretty much, I mean, once in a while I'll miss a day, but almost never do I miss a day. That doesn't mean I do the same thing every day, but I run, I bike, I swim, I lift weights, in addition to just the other regular sport. But I need it. If I have a day where I don't exercise, I just don't feel I don't feel great. And yeah, and so I'm very mindful of, I mean, no surprises, diet, community, positive attitude. And I guess the one thing that I would say is, people like Ray Kurzweil taking 150 pills a day. Who knows what's in these pills? Most of them are made in China. The ingredients are made in China, made in India. Nobody has any clue. So I take very few of these supplements and processed pills. I try to get my nutrition from food, fruits, vegetables, eating a balanced, colorful diet. I think that doesn't mean I'm against those other things, but I think everyone's first line of defense or even offense should be food. And again, supplements are fine. There's a debate over what works and what doesn't. But when I do take supplements, I do take magnesium every day, curcumin, turmeric. Again, it's just a spice. It's kind of like a food.
Yeah.
That I take, and just a few cocoa flavonoids I take. So the things that I do take occasionally are kind of food derivatives.
And what about biohacks, infrared sauna, cryotherapy, cold thermogenesis, anything that you do?
I'm not against any of it. I don't do much of it. I mean, my thing is diet and exercise. I mean, all those other things, I'm sure they're good, but to do them on a systemic level, you need to keep doing them. And so like my mother, I have her eating one raw purple potato every single day. She's been doing it for years. And I think it's a good idea. But the people who are doing all these different barometric pressure chambers and all those things, nothing wrong with them. And it's just that doing it once doesn't really do anything. And so I'm a big believer that habits, the sustainable habits, are the most significant drivers over time. Having said that, the one intervention that I think makes a lot of sense, and just more and more, you won't be surprised, Steve, what I'm about to say, and more animal research is showing, is that what they call intermittent fasting it actually seems to work pretty well. The human tests aren't as good as the animal tests, but the animal tests are very convincing. I don't like calling it intermittent fasting because it's basically just skipping breakfast, having coffee for breakfast. And basically, if you just have coffee for breakfast, no milk or sugar, and then just do that. Because the basic idea is to eat within an 8 to 10 hour window in the day. And I think the easiest thing, but you could also eat an early dinner. That seems to work for people. But the reason why I don't do that, one, is because I'm addicted to this morning hot chocolate. And so you don't, and then two, I think ultimately what the intermittent fasting is doing is it's signaling scarcity to your body. and I do think that my kind of extreme sports, my ultra marathon running and whatever, I think they're doing probably some kind of similar thing. But like my parents, I've encouraged them to do it. People who I know and respect, including scientists, are doing it and having positive results.
Right. Let's let the audience know about One Shared World. I think it's an incredible, venture that you've taken on, where people can connect with you. Hacking Darwin, I think, is an incredible book. You got a great website. But tell us a little bit more about One Shared World, because I think as a, almost as a philanthropist of really being so collaborative and helping people, I just see, I really pushed within with you because I see a man who's really trying to transform many people's lives worldwide and who's got a calling and a purpose that's truly inspiring. And if we had to live out our callings to inspire and empower people and build people up and educate people, then I think we would have a very different world. So tell us a little bit more about that before we end the show.
Thanks so much, Steve. So in the earliest days of the pandemic, I gave a talk actually for Singularity University. I was supposed to talk about whether the tools of the genetics revolution were a match for the COVID-19 pandemic. But that morning I woke up and I thought, that's not the talk I want to give. And so I gave a talk saying, even if we solve the COVID-19 crisis, it wouldn't matter if we didn't also solve the challenge of pandemics, because we're entering the age of synthetic biology. And so there will be more and they will be scarier and we have to be prepared. But even if we solve the problem of pandemics and don't solve public health, even public health and not climate change, even climate change and not nuclear arms proliferation, you get the point. And the basic issue is that there is a mismatch, because the greatest challenges that we face are common and global, but we haven't developed sufficient mechanisms for addressing common global challenges. And so my belief, and what I said in that talk for Singularity, is that we need to build an empowered global constituency of people all around the world who are demanding that our leaders at every level simply do a better job of balancing our narrower interests as citizens or members of companies or whatever, with our broader interests as humans sharing the same planet. And so that was the idea for One Shared World. That talk went viral. I stayed up all night a few days later and I drafted a declaration of interdependence. Sent that around, that went viral, and that was the beginning. Called a meeting. In our first meeting, we had people from 25 different countries, and together we built One Shared World. It's oneshared.world is the URL. We're hoping to be the global interdependence movement. I hope people will go to the website, learn more about us, sign the Pledge of Interdependence, and volunteer. We have lots of great programs. We have young people, for example, from 40 different countries have worked together over a series of debates and consultations to negotiate a draft UN treaty, a model UN treaty, ensuring clean water, basic sanitation and hygiene, and essential pandemic protection for everyone on Earth by 2030. We released that at our second Global Interdependence Summit, which was on September 23rd of this year, 2021. And now language from that is being incorporated into a draft resolution moving through the real UN. So it went from an idea, a principle, to the work of these young people from around the world working together to turn that into language, and that language actually going into a resolution at the UN, and we're hoping to be mirrored in the G20, and then to have a whole line of work flowing from there. We'd get millions of people now on our public programs, our summit. We have lots of really exciting things happening. And so I certainly encourage people, particularly young people, to go on the website, read the Declaration of Interdependence. It's in many languages, but of the South African language, it's in Zulu, Xhosa, wow, English, Hindi, wow, 20 languages, Bengali, all languages spoken in not to mention Italian and French and many others. So we'd love to get people involved. We'd love to have people volunteer.
Fantastic. And I don't know if you want to reiterate, if you got one message for the South African audience, although we're growing in the US with the podcast, 40% of our listeners are in the US, what message can you give about healthcare that people can grab hold of and just action straight away?
So it's what I said in the beginning. South Africa and the United States are countries where in many ways we are burdened with abundance. People have access to so many calories, even poor people, that we're actually causing harm to ourselves in doing things that we are biologically driven to do, which is amass calories and amass fat. And so we have these disorders that are crippling. And so while we need to think systemically, everybody has the capacity to do better. Everyone, myself included. And that means that we can't try to do everything at once. We should have small goals, like walking up a stairwell. And one little step, what's one little thing that we can do every day? If you live in an apartment building, could you, for example, stop taking the elevator except when you're carrying groceries or something like that? Just little tiny things. What's one small change? And change begets change. And the other thing is community. Community isn't just about having loving people around you. It's important. It's about trying to change habits together. We all do things that we could do better, we could do different. When we do things together, they become stickier. And final, I think, is a key point is just hope. Both of our societies are, again, big, messy, problematic, sometimes scary. And the goal isn't to be perfect. The goal is that we're all just trying to do our bit to be better. And in this world where social media is pushing us to extremes, pushing us to express things in ways that don't bring people together, I think everybody has a role. Everybody is a leader of something. And so we all need to take that responsibility seriously.
Thank you, Jamie Metzl. Thank you for your time. I salute you. It's an absolute privilege to have you on the show. Possibly maybe in a few months' time, we can talk to you about the pandemic origins. Thank you for just being courageous. Thank you for asking questions with regards to this pandemic and the origins. And, you know, if there's anything that I can or the Made to Thrive community or us 8 consultants online can do other than what you've mentioned, then please drop me a line, because we need more Jamie Metzls out there transforming people's lives and changing the world and being courageous to stand up. And I think we need courageous callings and we need collaborative, courageous callings. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve. It's my pleasure. But just to correct one thing, if my girlfriend were here, she would say, please, one Jamie Metzl is enough.
Thanks, Jamie.